game.
Castlevania Lords of Shadow Mirror of Fate is the game with the big name that's now on the small screen. This 3DS chapter attempts to fuse some of the franchise's classic 2D exploration with the 3D art style from the 2010 console reboot. For anyone unfamiliar with the Castlevania games, they revolve around a family of vampire slayers known as the Belmonts. They make it their business to bust down the door of Dracula's castle and kick the crap out of any undead nasties who get in their way. The Castlevania games pride themselves on the type of bitterly tough platforming that puts hair on your chest. Initially, you start out as Simon Belmont and unleash his iconic whip with some pretty slick combos. The basic combat works well, but you will notice quite a few nods to God of War, as you're dishing out punishment on the ground, then juggling enemies up for mid-air combos. Simon's roll out of danger and the frequent quick-time events are also both from the God of War playbook. It's the elements around the combat, though, that really seem to undermine it. There are secondary weapons like axes, but they're pretty ineffective, so you're better off just hammering that default attack button. And the enemy AI has the same IQ as a punching bag, which is actually quite lucky because that's all you'll end up using them for. The only strategy, if we can call it that, involves dashing backwards when an enemy flashes because that means they're about to attack. The game's magic system also feels largely unnecessary. Triggering magic allows you to use abilities like being invincible for short periods, but most of the time this feels like a bandage for poor game design. Sections like waterfalls of ghosts and acid are unpassable until you access your magic. And similarly, bosses take ages to chip away at, but instead of designing them better, the game just gives you a healthy dose of invincibility and a handful of mid-boss checkpoints to reduce your frustration. The game also regularly tells you to come back to a certain section when you've got the right equipment so you can get past a certain obstacle. For example, there might be a gap that's too large to cross until you get a power-up for your whip that lets you swing across it. And while revisiting previous areas to open up new sections has always been a big part of the Castlevania series, I know I'm going to step on a few toes when I say this, but the backtracking here was just so dull. First, there's the incredibly fiddly system of jotting backtracking notes on a map. And to make matters worse, the castle is made up of these disjointed sections that are just confusing to navigate, and they can actually be really bland to return to later. And lastly, the items you get for backtracking are like this. Ah, something glowing. Must be important. A note from a dead guy. Why is everyone leaving me useless notes in this game? I don't know, maybe if they spent less time writing notes and more time trying to stay alive, they wouldn't be dead. Being able to play as a few different characters is also a bit of a mixed blessing. It's definitely refreshing being able to switch over to the half-vampire Alucard, which I learnt is actually Dracula backwards, like race car. Go back to play. You get some cool new tricks like the ability to turn into a wolf. But it's also a hassle losing all the magic and secondary weapons you just spent the last few hours unlocking. Something I also think worth critiquing in any 3DS game is of course the 3D itself, and here it does a pretty good job of adding some nice depth to some of the backgrounds. However, I found many of the environments were way too dark, which makes them all really hard to appreciate on the handheld, especially when the 3D effect is turned on. Add to this, the game really chugs along from time to time, resulting in some rather clunky combat that doesn't hold an ancient candelabra to the fluid movement of previous games. But at least it shares some of the great music from the Castlevania series that I'm sure some fans will really appreciate. Now, I know it seems like I'm being particularly harsh on this game, but the fact is, with so many great smartphone games out there, mobile gaming has gotten really competitive, and I just don't think I can really recommend this mediocre platformer, so I'm giving it a 5. Now, getting to use the iconic whip again in Castlevania got me thinking, how many other games out there have whips in them? So I thought I'd have a look in a new segment I like to call